After 39 years of marriage, I thought I knew my wife. But the truth I uncovered one quiet afternoon didn't just break my heart. It destroyed everything I believed about love, family, and loyalty. Can you imagine being married for 39 years? That's not just a number, it's practically a lifetime spent side by side with someone. I always thought Tracy and I would grow old together. That was the dream. We'd been together for so long, and from the outside, folks used to say we were the perfect couple. My buddies at work and even neighbors often mentioned how lucky I was, how solid our marriage looked. And yeah, it did look that way, at least at first glance. I remember that Sunday in July like it was yesterday. It was one of those picture-perfect summer days, not a cloud in sight. I was cruising westbound about 2 hours out from Columbus, talking a little too loudly on my phone, caught up in the moment. The windows were all rolled down, the hatch in the back popped open, and the wind was rushing through the car like a small tornado. It was loud, sure, but the engine purred like a contented cat. That car, a 1996 Ford Probe, had a soul of its own, and it was mine, all mine. Funny thing, folks always talked about how expensive those were back in the day, especially around Detroit. But to me it was more than a car, it was a gift. A retirement present from Tracy, given to me not even a week earlier when we'd just gotten back from a trip to Washington. I remember picking it up like it was yesterday. I practically lit up when I saw it and told Tracy, "This is incredible." She gave me that soft smile of hers and said, "I'm glad you like it, just promise me you'll drive it like a grown man and not rack up a bunch of speeding tickets." I laughed and told her not to worry. The road was wide open, barely a soul in sight, and I might have been nudging past the speed limit, but just a touch. Before hanging up, she said, "All right, I'll see you tomorrow night." And with that, she ended the call. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and let out a yell of pure joy. Just me, the open road, and a full tank of gas. I'd already been driving for about 5 hours at that point, with plans to grab dinner in Columbus and stay overnight. I'd booked a room ahead of time. At 63, I just didn't have the same stamina I had at 35 or even 45. If Tracy had come along, we might have done the whole drive in one shot, taking turns behind the wheel like we used to. But this time I was flying solo. I've always had a soft spot for the Probe. The moment I got behind the wheel for a test drive back in '89, I was hooked. It was the debut of Ford's latest design, and when the dealerships around my town started stocking them, I knew I had to see it up close. The sleek lines, the way it handled, I couldn't stop thinking about it. After about a week of waiting, eventually I made up my mind to head over to the closest Ford dealership and finally take that car out for a spin. The moment I slid into the driver's seat and took off, I knew I was hooked. There was just something about the way it moved. That original Mazda engine didn't just offer raw power and speed, it was surprisingly fuel efficient too. The handling felt like something out of a racing movie, tight, responsive, and alive. Even the slightest nudge on the steering wheel sent the car gliding effortlessly from lane to lane. It was exhilarating to say the least. I'd spent over a decade behind the wheel of my first car, then another 11 years driving the second one. That second car? I bought it back in 1996, the final year of its production run. I kept it going strong for nearly 200,000 miles before it was totaled in a crash that wasn't even my fault. After that, I tried tracking down a replacement, eBay, forums, classifieds, you name it, but nothing turned up. So, for the past couple of years, I've been stuck with a plain, uninspiring car that got the job done but didn't stir anything in me. I spent 40 years working in the insurance industry. It wasn't exciting work. Actually, it was pretty repetitive, but the pay was solid and I managed to retire a few years ahead of the usual mark. Just before I turned 65, my team threw me a small farewell party. Nothing extravagant, but it was heartfelt. Tracy was there, and seeing her among my co-workers meant the world to me. They gave me a few thoughtful gifts, but the moment that hit me the hardest was when Tracy handed me a set of keys. I didn't recognize them at first, until I realized they belonged to the very car I'd once loved. Along with the keys was a little handwritten note. Turns out, my daughter and her husband had been quietly searching for months and managed to track down the exact model in pristine condition just outside Washington. It barely had any miles on it. The plan was for me to fly out there to pick it up, but instead they brought it home to surprise me. It was one of those rare moments in life that just stops you in your tracks. As I drove that day, passing through open countryside with the wind whipping through the windows, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. At one point, I rolled past a car full of teenagers, girls with the music turned up and smiles on their faces. They honked playfully and waved, and I couldn't help but grin as my silver hair blew wildly in the breeze. That quick glance at the girl driving, it stopped me. For just a second I saw a glimpse of Tracy from decades ago. Long blonde hair, slender frame, eyes I think were blue, though the years have dulled my memory a bit. Tracy used to light up every room she walked into. She was never one for sitting quietly on the sidelines. She was the kind of woman you noticed the moment she stepped through the door. Even now, at 63, she still had that quiet elegance about her, though time had softened the edges. I remember approaching her once at a gathering, wasn't expecting anything special, but something about how uncomfortable she looked standing alone in a room full of strangers pulled me in. I remember the look on her face that night. It wasn't just worry. It was the kind of startled fear you see in someone who's drowning and suddenly finds a hand reaching out. Tracy's eyes darted to the 2 beers in my hands, and with a strange edge in her voice, she asked, "Do you always take 2?" Her question was sharp, almost accusing. She stared at the glasses like they were part of some unspoken accusation. I bit back a sarcastic comment that was on the tip of my tongue and just answered flatly, "Most of the time." I didn't feel like explaining myself. I'm the kind of guy who tries to stay even-keeled. I don't wear my feelings on my sleeve, not usually. As I turned to walk away, I caught myself grinning. The memory of Tracy and my son-in-law pulling off that surprise with the car came flooding back. All those years, 39 of them, flashed through my mind like a slideshow I didn't ask to see. Where had the time gone? The birthdays, vacations, lazy Sunday mornings, it all felt like it had passed in a blink. By the time I rolled into the driveway, it was around 4:30 in the afternoon. I parked the probe out front, planning to move it into the garage after I grabbed something from inside. But when I walked up, remote in hand, ready to open the garage door, I stopped cold. Someone else's car was in my spot. At first, I just stood there, staring. I glanced at Tracy's car, then back at the unfamiliar vehicle. My gut twisted. Something didn't sit right. There was no reason for another car to be there, none that made any sense. My mind raced, trying to find some innocent explanation, but deep down, I already knew. Thoughts came rushing in like a tide I couldn't stop. Had she really done this? Did she have the nerve to carry on like that right under my nose? And what if something had happened? If that car was damaged, or if someone got suspicious? Would she dare call the police, knowing what might unravel? Involving law enforcement would mean questions. Questions I wasn't ready to answer. I had to be back early the next morning, and the last thing I needed was trouble with the law. Ralph left around 10 that night. I didn't see it, but I could imagine the hurried cleanup that must have followed. Fresh linens, air freshener, a quick sweep to erase any trace of him. I didn't say a word. Instead, I packed a small bag and headed out to Omaha, Nebraska. There was an old friend there I hadn't seen in ages, and right then, I needed space, needed someone who didn't know all the details. But I couldn't run from everything. When I returned, Tracy was sitting up in bed. Her eyes found mine, and I saw something in them I hadn't seen in years: anguish. She looked like she wanted to cry, but no tears came. And I begged her quietly to please stop. I told her I couldn't take the look she was giving me, that mixture of pity and guilt. I wasn't the one who should be pitied. If anyone had a right to fall apart, it was me. How could she do this? How could she betray everything we'd built, me, us? 39 years, it all passed so quickly. Some of those years felt real. Maybe the first 10, maybe even 20. But when did it shift? When did she stop loving me? I still don't know the answer. Andy, if you're reading this, I need you to understand something. My love for you, it never faded. Not once. She barely whispered the words, but they hit me like a slap. Over time, it just happened. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as if that would soften the blow or explain away the wreckage left behind. I shook my head in disbelief. "Listen, Alice," I said, calling her by her real name now, not some nickname softened by affection. "This isn't Wonderland. You don't get to spend years sneaking around with another man and then expect me to ride in on some white horse and carry you off into a perfect, everlasting sunset. That's not how real life works. At least not mine." I could feel my heart pounding as I said it, but I knew I needed to. I couldn't pretend anymore. She didn't flinch. Instead, she answered with a calm edge in her voice, "Andy," and the way she used my full name, it stung. That name from her mouth always meant something was wrong. Disapproval, frustration, a warning. "You're not a fool. You're a thoughtful man. There's no reason we can't find a path forward, even if it means I have to end things with Ralph." Ralph. That name still tastes bitter. She told me she'd been in Houston for a short work trip. The details were fuzzy now, something about a conference or maybe a client meeting. But what I do remember with haunting clarity is that she ended up inviting Ralph out to dinner one Saturday night. One dinner turned into a cascade of moments, and somehow, one of those moments ended with her bringing him upstairs. That night, she said, was the first time they truly connected. She described it as unforgettable, electrifying even, not just because it was new but because it was forbidden. He wasn't like anyone she'd met before. The thrill of it, the secrecy, the danger, that was part of the pull. After their second time together, they lay in bed for hours before he eventually slipped out. Those words, once spoken, didn't just sting. They carved into me. Sometime later, over lunch at a local deli, I sat across from my old college friend Willie, chewing through memories along with a roast beef and bell pepper sandwich. Willie and I go way back, to our days at Indiana State. He's known Tracy almost as long as I have. We'd even double-dated once or twice back in the day, him with his wife, me with Tracy. He looked at me, eyes full of concern, and asked, "Do you think she might be showing early signs of dementia? This just doesn't sound like the Tracy we knew." I sighed, heavy and tired. "I've thought about it," I admitted. "But honestly, I don't know. Maybe some folks will call me naive for what I said next, but I asked Willie to treat her with fairness if he ever found himself in the middle of it all. She had stood beside me for nearly 4 decades, and even though everything was falling apart, I didn't want to become someone filled with hate. I know time has a way of dulling memories. Eventually the edges won't feel as sharp. But the ache, it lingers. No amount of years will ever make it completely disappear." Then there was that phone call from my daughter. "Dad," she said gently, "if Ron were in your shoes, if Allison had been with someone else for 5 years, do you think he could forgive her?" The line went quiet. I imagined her watching Ron as she asked it, hoping for something tender, something merciful. But I knew Ron. That man's moral compass doesn't waver. And sure enough, his answer came through the silence, steady and unshaken. "No," he said. "I wouldn't forgive her," Ron said, his voice steady and without hesitation. "If something like that happened once, maybe it could be addressed with a warning, a serious one. But if it happened again, then the court would need to be involved. Actions have consequences, especially when trust is broken more than once." His words stuck with me long after the call ended. I kept going over everything in my head, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. The anger, the confusion, the loss, it all blurred together. I was on the verge of making a rash decision when Dr. Ruth, an old family counselor we'd seen once or twice, suggested something I hadn't considered. "Before you decide anything, Andy, take a moment to really listen. Don't speak until you've heard her out." So I took that advice to heart. The next time we sat down, me, Tracy, and the therapist, I let her speak. But not before I shared my side first. As someone who'd been blindsided and hurt, I had the right to tell my story uninterrupted. Tracy looked anxious from the start. The moment I began talking, she tried to interject, probably to defend herself, but the consultant calmly raised a hand and stopped her. "Andy goes first," he said. When it was finally her turn, she looked at me with a mix of guilt and nervous resolve. "That night when you weren't home on Saturday," she began, "I felt strange. Lonely, maybe even a little forgotten. I didn't plan for anything to happen. I invited Ralph over just to talk." She paused, gathering herself. "But I think he took it differently. He was more forward than usual. The way he flirted. I should have stopped it, but I didn't. We kissed, and from there it just happened. It felt like a natural extension of what we'd become, friends who'd gotten too close. And once we crossed that line, I knew we were going to end up in bed." She looked down, almost ashamed. "It was the first time in 42 years that I'd been that close to anyone besides you," she added quietly. Those words broke something in me. For so long I'd seen us as two halves of the same whole. But somewhere along the way she began drifting. Now we weren't a team, we were individuals living separate lives. Tracy seemed consumed by her own wants, her own feelings. Everything else, me, our life together, even Ralph, was fading into the background. I told her I couldn't keep living like that. I couldn't accept being a shadow in my own marriage. But Dr. Worlingham, our counselor, stepped in and added a wrinkle I didn't expect. "She says she still loves you, Andy," he said. "She says her relationship with Ralph wasn't about love. It was physical. A lapse, not a replacement. Physical." That word rang in my ears. I didn't know if I believed her. Or maybe, deep down, I just didn't want to. During our next session, as we sat once again with Dr. Worlingham, he started to shift the conversation toward a possible resolution. The idea that there was a way to solve this felt dizzying to me. My head was spinning. "Let's begin with Tracy," he said gently. She looked at both of us and said, "I don't want to lose what I have with Andy. I truly believe," Tracy had said during our final session, "that we can get through this. That we can find our way back to happiness." She sounded so certain, but in the silence that followed, all I could feel was how far apart we'd grown. Later, after thinking it over again and again, she told me she realized her earlier apologies hadn't gone deep enough. They hadn't touched the core of her remorse. It wasn't just a betrayal of marriage vows, it was a betrayal of trust, something sacred. And now she finally understood the weight of that loss. Then life, unexpected and cruel, cut our story short. 2 days before the funeral, my daughter Allison and her husband Ron arrived from Washington. They were the ones organizing everything just as Tracy had requested. Allison had called me and asked if I could come by early to talk before the rest of the guests arrived. She said it might be good, for both of us. She offered me a chance to help prepare, to say something at the service, or even just to be present afterward at the gathering. It was 39 years, she said gently. And despite how it ended, you probably knew her better than anyone. She wasn't wrong. I did know her, at least the version of her that existed before everything started slipping away. On the day of the funeral, I stood outside the chapel with Allison, Ron, and the kids. As people filtered in and began to settle into their seats, something in me felt off. Like I was witnessing a memorial for someone I hadn't truly known in years. What we had, Tracy and I, felt like a memory someone had borrowed from an old film reel. Real but distant. Kay, an old friend, and I took our place quietly in the last row. The pastor delivered a moving eulogy. He spoke about Tracy's warmth, her light, her dedication to family and friends. I saw people wiping away tears, some of them sobbing. But I didn't cry. I'd cried for Tracy a long time ago, alone in a different kind of mourning. Afterward, we returned to the house Tracy and I had once shared. It looked the same, though the air inside carried the unmistakable weight of absence. Familiar faces greeted me, friends I hadn't seen in years, smiles tinged with sorrow and nostalgia. At one point, Kay tried to explain things to Ellie and Ron, reassuring them. "We just don't want to overwhelm your dad," she said softly. "He's still strong for his age. And these days, well, there are ways to manage the little challenges." She was trying to keep things light, I suppose. "A man's mind doesn't just disappear overnight," she added with a wink. Allison and Ron shared a quick, quiet smile. My grandson found the whole exchange amusing and couldn't stop giggling. Everyone had assumed I'd end up alone. I'd assumed that too. But what I didn't expect was how hard it would be to admit that to Wayne, my 10-year-old little brother who, back then, had seemed more like a giant. He was taller, heavier, and definitely stronger. I'd lost more scuffles to him than I could count. But I was determined even then not to show weakness, especially not in front of the girl I thought was the most incredible person I'd ever met. Back in the day, there were only 2 other kids on our block besides my siblings and me, Eddie and Susan Marsden. Eddie was 12, Susan was 8, just like me. Naturally, we all ended up spending a lot of time together. Susan and I, being the same age, quickly became close. We'd spend entire afternoons racing bikes, making up stories, or just lying in the grass talking about nothing and everything. As we got older, our paths would drift and reconnect as kids' friendships tend to do. Eddie, for some reason, took it upon himself to keep me updated on Susan's teenage romances. Anytime she started seeing someone new, he was the first to tell me. It was never malicious, just a kind of teasing, though it stung more than I'd ever let on. My parents used to comment on how Susan had stopped coming around to our family get-togethers. I noticed too, but I didn't have the courage to ask why. My brother, Aaron, never missed an opportunity to bring it up, usually peppered with comments about seeing her with different guys around town. Diana, my sister, always had my back though. She'd roll her eyes and remind Aaron that he wasn't exactly a ladies' man himself. I still remember the day Aaron looked across the room and said, half joking but clearly interested, "I'm thinking of asking Blondie out. She's been smiling at you a lot. Might as well see if she wants someone older." That hit me harder than I expected. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I'd missed my chance, that I should have been the one by her side all along. When Susan and I did reconnect, it felt like something out of a forgotten dream. We were just walking, nothing special, but the comfort between us returned instantly. Somewhere during that walk, I reached out and kissed her. I let my hand brush gently along her arm. Every time I did, she'd arch an eyebrow, playfully, not in protest, and then smile at me like she'd been waiting for it. She wasn't just someone I loved, she was my best friend in every way. We grew up together, and in so many ways we grew into each other. On our wedding day, I remember looking at her and thinking how lucky I was. Years later, after we'd had our 2 kids, she looked even more radiant than before. Something about her, her figure, her presence, had deepened with time. Her body had changed, yes, her curves a little fuller, her beauty more seasoned, but it only made her more captivating to me. I used to look at her and feel this overwhelming gratitude that she was mine. Then came the call from my mom. The kind that makes your stomach drop before you even hear the words. Aaron, my older brother, the one who never touched a cigarette in his life, had been diagnosed with lung cancer. The doctors gave him about 2 years. We were stunned. No one saw it coming. The news knocked the air out of me. Right before Susan left for her first shift in California, she'd gotten a temporary position out there. We gathered the kids for a family meeting. We all agreed. Wayne, my brother who'd been struggling more and more, needed help. And while Susan would be gone, the kids promised to step in where they could. Susan, always thinking ahead, spent the next couple of days cooking and freezing meals so Wayne would have something ready when he needed it. She didn't say much about it, but I could see how deeply she cared, not just for Wayne but for all of us. That was Susan. No matter what had happened in the past, when it came down to it, she showed up. I really appreciate everything you do for our family, I told Susan one quiet evening. She was getting ready to leave and I felt this need to say something honest, something kind. But right after that, I warned her, gently but firmly, please don't let yourself get pulled into his lies. Don't fall for his manipulation. She didn't argue. Her eyes welled up as she nodded and turned to walk away. The way she moved, slow, distant, made me feel like something wasn't right. I didn't know what exactly, but there was a heaviness in her eyes that stuck with me. I figured maybe it was the stress of my brother's illness. He was dying after all. That kind of weight changes people, even the strongest ones. Still, a darker, selfish thought crept into my mind for a moment, one I didn't want to face. I shoved it aside, refusing to give it air. Earlier that day when I dropped Susan off, the atmosphere between us had shifted. The ease we used to share was gone. Conversation was sparse. Awkward silence filled the car like fog. By the time we got home, even the kids seemed to sense the change. One of them, barely a teenager, laughed and tossed flirtatious comments in Susan's direction. I tried not to make anything of it, but it struck me as wildly inappropriate. She was married. I was standing right there. Later, I confided in a friend, Marianne. What do we even do here? I asked. If this is just a passing thing, some weird infatuation, I can probably let it go. But if it's something deeper, something dangerous, then it's a whole different story. I still believe in marriage and commitment. If she crosses that line, it's not just her life that falls apart, it's ours. I prayed she wouldn't go there. I prayed for strength I didn't think I had. But the moment I walked into that room, the moment I opened the door and saw them, it all shattered. They were tangled together, startled, scrambling to cover themselves. Blankets thrown, clothes half off. My brother, dying or not, stood frozen, caught in the act. Susan's hands fumbled to hide what was already too exposed, tears already welling in her eyes. My voice rose without thinking, pure rage and heartbreak. If you weren't dying, I swear I would have ended this differently. I turned to Susan, my voice breaking. As for you, don't bother coming back. After your month is up, just stay here. Stay with him. That's what you want, right? She tried to speak, but her words got caught in her tears. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to hold a sheet to her chest, shaking, helpless. All these years, I muttered, more to myself than to them, and this is how it ends. With lies. With betrayal. My brother, my own brother, stood to the side, not saying a word at first. But I could see the smirk on his face, like he'd just figured out some grand cosmic joke. While Susan pretended to fuss with the bed and the washing machine nearby, he saw an opening and couldn't help himself. You know, buddy, he said, smug as ever, maybe you just weren't enough. And for a split second I thought he was going to die right there, not from the cancer but from me. She's really something in bed, my brother said as casually as if we were talking about the weather. Didn't take much to convince her to stay in my room. I didn't even flinch. The truth is, I already knew what I was going to find at his house. This trip wasn't about discovering the betrayal, it was about confirming what my gut had already told me. Deep down, I was still holding on to some sliver of hope that maybe I was wrong, that maybe I'd misread it all. But hope can be a cruel thing. It's like standing in front of a mirror and trying to move fast enough to avoid your reflection catching up. No matter how quick you are, it always captures the truth, every angle, every crack. That's what this felt like. A desperate, foolish attempt to unsee what had already been seen. And sadly, it wasn't the first time something like this had rattled our family. That evening, after the worst of the shouting had died down, my mom reached out to her sister. But her words were hollow, uncertain, like she didn't even know what to say. This whole thing had stirred up memories, especially for me. I remembered back when I was a teenager and the Parker family moved in across the street. Belinda Parker, strikingly beautiful and nearly a decade younger than my mother, seemed to turn heads every time she stepped out to check her mailbox. especially during the summer in her tiny swimsuits. It didn't go unnoticed, least of all by my dad. Mom hated it. She'd make snide remarks at dinner about Belinda, trying to disguise her discomfort with sarcasm. We all knew it wasn't just jealousy, it was fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize someone else might have your partner's attention. I still remember the time she asked, half joking but deadly serious, if Belinda were dying, would your father try to climb into her hospital bed? Now, years later, I couldn't help but feel like history was repeating itself, only with me in the middle of the heartbreak. Susan had betrayed me, and she knew that I wasn't the type to just let things go. I could be vengeful when wounded, and she was well aware of that. So her silence after I found out didn't surprise me. 2 whole weeks passed without a word from her. Not a call, not a message. She knew apologies, empty ones at least, would only make things worse. She also knew what usually worked: physical closeness. She'd done it before, pulled me back into her arms, whispering words of regret as I lay next to her. Her embrace, her warmth, in the past that was enough to quiet the storm. But not this time. When she finally came back into the room after a hushed phone call, the kids, sensing something heavy in the air, slipped out quietly. The silence between us was unbearable, stretched tight like a fraying rope. Then, softly, Susan broke it. "Do you really believe divorce, Jeff, just like that, is the best answer?" Her voice cracked at the mention of the word we hadn't spoken aloud until that moment. Divorce. A word that felt like a cold blade between us. And for the first time, I realized we were standing on opposite sides of something that might never be bridged. "I've known about you and my brother for quite some time," I finally told her, my voice low but steady. "And believe me, I've been more than fair. But don't stand there and pretend you didn't know what this would do. Don't tell me it just happened." Susan opened her mouth as if to say something, but instead, she lowered her eyes. Then, as if the situation wasn't already unraveling fast enough, she whispered something I nearly didn't catch. "I'm pregnant." The words barely reached my ears, but they landed like a thunderclap. Everything around me seemed to blur for a second. My mind was spinning. "This is a complicated situation, Susan," I managed to say after a pause. "What?" she snapped, suddenly defensive. I took a deep breath and tried to explain. "In some cases, the judge might delay divorce proceedings until after the baby is born." "No," she said quickly, almost desperately. "He won't do that. The baby isn't yours, so it has nothing to do with our divorce." Then came something I didn't expect. "I could say it is," she offered quietly. That broke something in me. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just looked at her and said, Don't make this uglier than it already is." From that moment forward, I made a decision, one I would stick to no matter what. I wasn't going to let bitterness define me. I wouldn't let past pain ruin what was still good in my life, especially when it came to my kids. I made it clear to my children and the rest of the family, I would never let lingering resentment stop me from showing up for them. I'd be there at every major event. And when my daughter got married 6 years after the divorce, I proudly walked her down the aisle. I even sat next to Susan in the front row on the bride's side. She tried to reach for my hand and I quietly pulled away. That small gesture said everything that needed to be said. After the divorce, I rebuilt my life. I picked up new hobbies, met new people, and started seeing the world differently. It wasn't the same as the life I'd had with Susan, but it wasn't a bad life either. At one wedding, I found myself seated next to a man I hadn't noticed at first. He leaned in, offered his hand, and introduced himself. "Melvin Downey," he said with a friendly nod. "I'm Susan's first husband." I couldn't help but chuckle. Something about his presence was oddly comforting. Maybe it was the shared history, or maybe just the fact that he understood a part of my past few people did. For a brief moment, I thought maybe I'd found someone I could really talk to, someone who understood what it meant to lose her. But life still had one more cruel twist in store. One day, Susan was out with a much younger man, someone new. He ran off during an argument and Melvin, trying to protect her, gave chase. Susan panicked, ran after them both, and in the chaos, darted into the road without seeing the oncoming car. The impact was brutal. She died from multiple injuries. Melvin told me everything afterward, how it all unfolded, how helpless he felt. When I heard the news, my heart raced so fast I thought I might collapse. My vision blurred. My chest felt tight. Susan, my first love, my partner through decades of joy and heartbreak, was gone. That's the end of the story, my friend. At least for now.